and I was trying to edit it, and I was trying to add something, cut out something out of it, but I ended up deleting it by mistake. But I wanted to continue off on what happened with me when I was working at this company called Semaphore. What are some of the abuse, some of the stress, and how much turmoil I had to go through while working at this company? I could name several incidences. I remember just starting off working as a lab assistant. I was basically used as a pawn for other, people that were like at a higher rank level than me. So the techs will ask me, "Oh, can you uncap the blood for me?" And I realized that these techs, a lot of times were like they will sit down and not do anything, and when they see me, they were like, "Oh, can you uncap the blood for me?" And I realized they were using me because they were able to, because I'm a lab assistant. So that basically means they could use me as a scapegoat. So there are times when I would like do that. I like we run a lot of samples in the lab. And one time I was uncapping one of these blood, and if you're not careful in how you uncap the blood, you could spill the blood. So there are times I accidentally spilled the blood. But at the same time, I realized it was stress. It was because of stress. It was a lot of stress I was under because I was expecting to do more than what a lab is supposed to be doing. And I wasn't getting paid as much as these lab techs were. And they weren't working as much hours and putting in as much time as I did. So I was responsible for not only uncapping the blood and not only rotating the blood, because you have to rotate the blood back and forth before you could put it on the machine, but you also have to verify the label to make sure they match, so that there is no discrepancy with the patient's name, with the date of birth, that there is no error that comes up. So I was responsible for fixing those problems and make sure those issues were resolved. And if the department QC the sample, they will put like a sticker on it to let you know the sample doesn't have any error. Whoever's watching this, I mistakenly deleted my previous video, when I try to expose this company that did me dirty. So I uploaded another copy of it. Thankfully, I saved it as a copy, so I don't. I thankfully I have that. But I was saying I'm gonna go more into details of the struggles I went through while working at this company. So I was saying I was working at Semaphore, and I was responsible for labeling these samples to make sure they have the like the patient's name matches up, because there's two separate labels, and you have to check to make sure the patient's name matches up with each other, that the date of birth matches up, and that there are no other things that were wrong with the label. So if there was an issue that I was able to notice, I would make note of that and notify the department, which is a session, about the error so they can fix it. As I was saying before, if there is no issue with the label, they will say they will like they will QC it, or they put like a pinkish label to make sure they QC'd it, to make you know that they QC'd it and that the sample don't need to go for a session, and that they fixed the problem and it's good to go. So I remember they would get so much samples that would come in the lab. I mean, practically hundreds and hundreds of samples, and these samples were coming in by the minute. And in the lab that we were working in, the space was so condensed, like you practically couldn't work in a tight space like that, because it's like you felt like you was literally brushing upon people, like walking all over. Like it's like literally people was like 1 foot away from you. It was so tight, it was so condensed, and then like you felt congested, like you can't breathe. So when I used to work in that environment, it would be like the lab itself would be hot. So it's like I could not breathe, and it was like I was struggling to get fresh air. So the lab environment was very uncomfortable. The environment, it was like very tightly spaced. There was no breathing space, and you have to literally be careful where you was walking, because we were actually, you know, exchanging the samples, transferring the samples from one machine to the next. So we call the Chemagic 360. I think that's the name of it. And then we'll transfer the sample from chemogen 1 to chemogen 2. And you practically have to like take your time and do it. I made sure to be careful when I was doing it because is a lab is small enough already, and people are walking back and forth in and out of the labs. And there, you like you could, if you're not careful, you could trip over somebody else's feet. That's how small the space were. So I remember just like the amount of work that I did. It's like I had to, make sure the samples were ready to run for extraction. I had to also put the sample, when you're preparing the sample to run on the machine, you have to place it in a certain order. So I have to make sure the label was positioned at a certain angle, and then I had to place it in this tube thing, this rack holder, and then rotate the sample back and forth several times, because the blood has to be homogenized. So once I done that, I then started to prepare the samples and to get ready on the machine to get for the run for the extraction. So I started like preparing the samples and them up on the machine, and I remember like there are some times where I would be like just tired, and I'm like, you know what, I need to take a break because I realize this work, it requires a lot of attention to detail, and it's very fast paced, and if you're not able to work in that type of environment, you could feel like burnt out. And it was a little bit, very exhausting, I would admit, because I did put in a lot of time into the job, but I was doing a lot more than what I was supposed to have done, because the like I said, the techs that were they didn't do that much work. I'm not saying they didn't do their part, but in terms of like the machines, getting the machines ready for the extraction, all they did was, follow a set of protocols to get the chemogen run started. But I was the one that did like the heavy load, like the labor behind it. Like there were these things behind there was this thing called watch buffers, and they were like, it went from I think 2 to 6, and these watch buffers run out frequently. Like, I mean, they run out every 2 to 3 days, 4 days being the top. I had to go in this area where they keep all this, they store all the materials that you use for the lab, and I have to start stacking up on like the wash buffers, the lysis buffer is another thing we use in the lab, um, and then I have to make sure those are ready. So they always have those ready. They never run out of those materials. So I will like set up the wash buffers, and I will also set up the license buffers. And then another thing I had to do was to make sure that the water that was used to run the machine was full. And there are times, if it's not be full, I have to throw out the waste and then fill it all the way to the top. And there are times, like you get caught up in other things, and I was busy. Not only that, that was not even my main work. My main job was to make sure I manage the samples that originally comes into the lab by scanning the blood, once it's like scanning the blood and checking the re-extraction worksheet. That was like the main core of my job, like, because that's what I was being trained on initially. So I would scan the samples into this thing called blood storage, and after I finished scanning the samples into the blood storage, I would store the samples that were in the rack in the cold room. And then the worksheet is like the main thing that I did in that lab. I had to generate a worksheet of samples that needed to go for re-extraction. So these are samples that have been extracted already, and they need to go for another extraction, or they need to do another extraction for validation purposes, and what you have, what may become from that. So what I ended up doing was I had to do that, generate the list, and then although these other list of samples I had to get ready were called Southern blot samples. And I'm kidding you not, these samples were numerous. It was like at least 4 or 5 pages worth of samples, back and forth of Southern blot samples that I had to do. And I got help occasionally from, one of my coworkers and two my coworkers them, because but they were not working full time in my lab, so they could only help me when they were able to. And then the lead black tech that used to work there, he used to help me, but he barely helped me that much. He just did it when he realized that I couldn't keep up with the demands because I was doing everything by myself. So, you know, so like in terms of doing that, I was responsible for all of that, and at the same time I had to, when I was to fill up the bucket of water, I had to walk into another department, and then I have to like turn that water on and distill it and wait there for at least 10 to 15 minutes. And you know what's the crazy thing about it? People were complaining that I was wasting time. I wasn't doing my work when I was practically staying there to fill up the water to make sure the water bucket is full in order to run it on the machine. And also, when I was in the cold room looking up samples from the re-extraction worksheet, people were saying I was wasting time and I was just hanging out and stuff. So people were like just treating me like trash. And it's like no matter what I did, it's like I was being blamed for everything. I was like basically the butt of all jokes. I was the person that was this easy target because like you're a lab aide, you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. But people took advantage of that and they're like, oh man, I could just use them to do my dirty work. So people would ask me for favors, and like I couldn't really say much because I was a lab aide. And if I brought it up and say, I'm busy, even though there are times when I was legitly busy. I had no other I had no time to get to a certain task at that particular time because I was focused on doing one particular thing. People were complaining to the supervisor and then a manager saying, oh, when I asked him to do a particular task, he was saying he was busy. And I'm like, yo, people are fucking bitches. Like, you're gonna complain to the manager and say I was being busy when I was really being busy. I had no time to do everything. I'm only one person. And I realized I was being treated like crap, man. And I dealt with this for at least a year and 5, 6 months before they started hiring more people. But there were a lot of people that were leaving that job while I was there. When I started working there, there were like people there. I've seen so much people leave that company, and I've seen people leave Semaphore on a large amount of scale. But I was stuck it through. I persevered, and I was like telling myself, that I would get through the storm, and I will find my way out, and I will come out victorious. So through all of that struggle, all of that frustration, all the stress that I went through, I didn't let it phase me, and I told myself, eventually I'll be rewarded for my hard work. So when the company ended up moving into Connecticut, Stanford, right? They still didn't promote me, and I said in my previous video, I went through a whole bucket load of process like to land a promotion. I did a mock interview. I filled out an application form. Like I wasn't even working there. Like I just started working. I did a whole bunch of nonsense for them to say, we don't promote. We don't. The promotion is still under review. And then like 3, 4 months going in, when they moved to Connecticut, they gave me the promotion, but then they promoted everybody else that didn't do not even as much work as I did, that in terms of like doing the application all over again, doing a mock interview, going through all that process. Nobody else did that except for me. And then when I'm like I said, when I moved to Connecticut, they didn't train me on new things that I needed to learn in order to get caught up with the lab, and I was behind, and I had to like fish for every information that I could get. So I felt like I was basically being set up for failure, and I wasn't allowed the chance to really grow and really reach my full potential. So this company is very unethical, and I just got to call it out for what it is because, like I said, I put in so much hours into this job. And if it wasn't for me, there are certain things they would have been struggling with because I implemented this protocol into the lab where it will allow samples to be retrieved much faster and efficiently. And it was my idea that allowed things to go smoothly in the lab. And if it wasn't for me, things would be missing because there were so many times I had to retrieve samples that were misplaced, and I had to notify the department about the issue ongoing. And like I said, my coworker would fuck up all the time, and he would mess up and screw up, and he didn't get held under a microscope as much as I did. And when it came out to certain minor thing, I was basically scrutinized. I was treated like a criminal. I was being bashed. I was being treated on like terribly. And it ended up becoming where they just all team up against me and decided to just fire me. And then, like I told you, my coworker, this bitch that they hired, basically started accusing me of things I didn't do, started harassing me, started to like just basically turn against me, all because of this meeting where they fabricated a story against me that was not true, and they all team up against me and sided with other coworkers. So these people are a bunch of evil, narcissistic, racist ass fucks, and they need to be called out for the shady people they are. And I'm just venting right now, but I've held back, and I tried to file a lawsuit against them for wrongful termination, but the lawyers were giving me a very hard time, and they said they'll only will fight my case, and they will consider doing it unless they won't consider doing it unless I pay them $2,000. And I'm like, you know what? Just take the money that you got from the severance agreement, whatever. Just take it and just move on with your life. And that's what I did. I'm just gonna move on with my life, but at the same time, I'm gonna call them out for what they put me through, and just exposing them, because I'm not the only one who's been through this turmoil, through this hurt and pain. And they fired another guy that I know that worked there longer than I have, and he's one of the hardest working person I've seen at that job. And he told me they fired him over some bogus reasons, and he's Hispanic. And I'm like, these people have no type of ethics, no type of integrity. They just get rid of you like you're nobody. And then they know that people who have worked the hardest and have put in time into it, they're gonna want to be compensated for the hours they put in. So in order for them to save face, they're gonna get rid of you. So, Semaphore is a very shady company. They can't be trusted. They treat their workers like shit. They take your work for granted. No matter how hard you work, they will just treat you like you're nobody, and they feel like they can easily replace you. And I felt very down in spirit, but I just brought myself up and realized it's not my loss, it's theirs. I brought a lot more value to the company, and I was way too good for them, and they didn't deserve my hard work. They didn't deserve the time I sacrificed to keep that company afloat. They didn't deserve anything from me. So in the sense, it was best for me to not even work there anymore. It was a blessing in disguise, but the way they treated me, I need to call it out for what it is. I need to expose these people, these individual, for the crooks they are. They're very shady. They don't have any type of morals or ethics, and it's just wrong what they do, man. Especially with person of color. Like, I worked hard to get somewhere in life. I worked hard to build my reputation, and then they just try to tarnish my reputation, saying I didn't work hard enough. And one thing I value and one thing I take pride in is my hard work. Like, if anything, I take pride in how hard my work. Like, I'm the type of person that I don't feel good until the job is done. And I was the type of person that would stay extra late to make sure the job was finished. Some people say, leave it for tomorrow. The next people in the morning will take care of it. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna make sure this job gets done, because it's not finished until it's done. So I was the one that practically stayed up extra hours and stayed a lot of overtime to make sure whatever job I had to do was finished, and also do other people work. Because another time they were so behind, they asked me, can you stay late? And I was working with the tech, and she didn't have time to get everything done, and I was helping her, and this was practically not my responsibility, but I did it anyways. And the next day, it's like nobody give you a pat on the back. No one say thank you for the hard work you did. Like, it's like you never felt appreciated for any of the hard work you put into this job. Like, it felt like you were just a number, and like they were just using you for the time being, just to use you, and just like taking you for granted. And that's what I felt like. So I did all this work, and I felt like none of that was being acknowledged, and I was being treated like like garbage. So I'm just telling myself, you know what, I deserve better. I'm not gonna allow somebody, treat me like this. And now I realize, after not working there anymore, like I really deserve better because the amount of time I put into this job and how much value I bring to this company, I deserve to get paid more. I deserve to get a promotion. I deserve to, do more with what I have. And they were preventing me from reaching my full potential. Like they were keeping me in one position and they wanted me to stay in that position as long as they can afford to. And I know for a fact if I was still working there, they will still keep me at the lab tech one. And I wouldn't have been promoted to a higher level in order to do more stuff because even when I try to ask for a promotion, they were not giving me that promotion. So, I felt like I was being used. You know what I mean? I felt like I was being used. I felt like I was being taken for granted. And it's like no matter how hard I work, it was like never good enough. Even though I try to do more work than I necessarily can do, it was never good enough. And I remember that one time when I found out that they promoted the person who I helped train to do my job higher than me. They did it in such a shady way. They never mentioned to me that they promoted this guy. I found out through word of mouth. And then they had me work on the bench. And before he used to help me out in the bench, and he was over on the other side of the lab and he was doing plating. And I'm like, why is he over on the other side? That's lab tech 2 work. And someone else told me that no, they promoted him. And I'm like, why is it they did this behind my back? And what they end up having me do is the same work, but twice as much work I have to do now because the same person who I helped train to do my job is no longer doing that anymore. So I was on the bench doing multiple things, and then they were like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's the same amount of work that you usually do." I'm like, "That's bullshit," because I'm doing twice as much work now, and I felt like so like I felt like like it was a slap in the face, and I felt so used and manipulated. I'm like I did all of this just to stay in the same position that I started off at. And when I was working on the bench, I realized that I was being overwhelmed with so much samples, so much requests. People asking for this sample, people asking for that sample, asking for status updates of this sample, people, asking why wasn't this sample extracted, and I have to explain why we haven't extracted the samples yet. Now, and also I had to make sure the samples that came into the lab were, checked to make sure that they had no errors. And then I had to verify these samples and scan them into this format called BSV. And on top of that, doing this countless time, and I was just like, man, how can I keep going? Like I'm being overworked. And when they hired this new bitch, that one that set me up to get me fired, she started off like, working and doing the stuff, like other stuff on the side. But I was still in charge of making sure samples were being sent out on Mondays. And I was in charge of setting up the stuff for that. And even when I learned something new, I was told, oh, you don't have to do that anymore. And I also remember the supervisor of the lab, that like whole entire lab, was telling me, you don't need to be answering emails anymore. Just focus on scanning blood. So she would like limit me to only one thing. She wouldn't allow me to like learn the whole part of the lab. So it's like I was being restricted on doing one particular thing, and they never give me the opportunity to grow and to become more diverse in the lab. And basically be a more well-rounded individual. So after all this mess, I was like, you know what? I had meetings too. I had multiple meetings with the supervisor and the manager, and I was just so frustrated because I felt like I was going anywhere. I felt like I was wasting my time, and even though I tried to have a meeting with the supervisor to ask why wasn't I being promoted to a new position, all I got was like, oh, you know how to do this. You got to prove that you're worthy of this. You got to prove that you're worthy of that. Basically, a bunch of nonsense, BS, like telling me, oh, you haven't shown that you are capable of doing the work yet. And I'm like, wait, capable of what? I've been doing the same thing for the past 2 years, going on to 3 years. I've been doing the same thing over and over and over again. Like, yeah, there's a few extra stuff that I had to learn, but for the most part, I haven't learned much. And I'm like, wait, so you keeping me in the same position for this long? You're not allowing me to, learn new things. And you know, even when I try to I try to, go out my way to do work, you guys don't even appreciate that. So I feel like I wasn't basically going nowhere with this job. And then I remember the times when they had the meetings, they were like, "Oh, we're gonna start cross training each other, people in the lab, in order to allow them to learn different techniques in the lab." And this promise didn't go on deaf ears because this promise went on deaf ears because when it came time for us to be cross trained, we didn't get cross trained on anything. Like people were like, "What happened to the promise that we're gonna be cross trained?" And they're like, basically didn't say a single word. And all the plans they had planned out, to make the lab be more organized, to help it flow more better. None of those plans came to fruition. So there's like a lot of false promises this company, made, and it's like, how can you trust a company that has a habit of lying? Mind you, I mentioned before in my previous video that they promised to give us an end of the year bonus, and this is something they had written as an agreement. And when it came time to give us the end of the year bonus, we didn't receive anything. And then coming on to this year, like eventually gave the end of the year bonus, but I only got half of it because I was married. But this was an agreement that was written and stated that they would give it to us at the end of the year, but they pushed it back a couple months back. So they're very shady. They don't live up to their promises, and they can't be trusted. That's all I gotta say about these people. And I don't see them ruin. I don't see them lasting for too long because a lot of people are planning to leave that job, and yeah, it needs to be called out for the shady people they are. And I mean, I have a lot left to say, but I'm gonna leave it at this because I wanna break it up in parts. But yeah, Semaphore is a very shady company. They need to be reported for the unethical business practices they partake in. And if anyone has a chance, please report this company to the Business Bureau, Better Business Bureau, or any type of law for any site that you can find that can report company for unethical business practices. Please do that, because this company needs to be called out. I'm not the only one who's frustrated with this job, and seeing how they treat people is just not right, man. And I'm not gonna sit back idly and just accept the type of abuse that they put me through. I'm gonna call them out for the type of bullshit they put me through, and they need to be held accountable for what they did to me, because what they did to me was very wrong and very messed up. But I'm gonna leave the video at that. Thank you and have a great day. Bye.